I'm hensley-williams.
I'm Luca McDonald.
I'm Ryan Watkins.
I'm Autumn Fairweather.
And I'm Sage Dennison.
And our project's about the women's rights during the Great Depression.
As a group, we've been researching women changing roles during the Great Depression. We've read a lot of books, we've watched a lot of documentaries, and we've even interviewed our teachers, great-grandparents, and grandparents to learn about how women changed roles during this time. The 1920s, a decade known as the Roaring Twenties, had been a great time of prosperity in America. But then came the crash of the New York stock market in the fall of 1929, and suddenly the party was over. As the 1930s dawned, Americans faced a collapsing economy. The Great Depression threw millions out of work. To make matters worse, a severe drought made it impossible for many farmers to grow crops. Hundreds of thousands of families were forced to give up their farms. Many headed west to find work and became migrant farmers in California. At first, President Herbert Hoover did not see how the problem was big. On March 7, 1930, he promised that the Depression would be over in 60 days.
Instead, the country sank deeper into the Depression. One by one, businesses failed. The unemployment reached in vain for new jobs. Some sold apples on street corners, others begged. Families were faced with the threat of starvation. Banks failed and many customers lost their life savings. In 1932, Americans eager for change elected Franklin Roosevelt as the next president. Roosevelt ushered in a new era of hope. He began government programs to pull the country out of the Depression known as the New Deal. These relief offers would radically change the role of federal government in the lives of American people.
How much do you know about women shifting roles since the Great Depression? Many people know about the stock market crash in 1929 that caused money to disappear and people were losing money. But they may not know how this time period actually ended up throwing women in the long run to enter the job market for the first time before World War II. However, women largely are still in charge of domestic tasks at the house even after both men and women worked in the workforce. So it is truly beneficial things that times of the Great Depression and World War II sent women into the workforce.
From the 1930s to the 1940s, many men were suddenly unemployed because of the stock market crash in 1929. Women had to suddenly work outside of the house. Interestingly, white women had higher employment rates during the Great Depression than white men because their jobs were not impacted by the stock market as much by corporate investments. Women were more insulated from job losses because they were employed in more stable industries like domestic service, teaching, and clerical work. The Great Depression drove women to find work quickly. Men who used to make money for the family lost their jobs. Marriage rates went down 22%, which made women have to provide for themselves.
Most women used to work inside the house, but since men had been unemployed, it resulted in women working in places like restaurants, factories, laundries, and beauty shops. They were paid less than men, but their jobs were so essential that they weren't lost. In the 1930s, women started fighting for equal pay and equal working conditions.
The First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, persuaded her husband, Franklin D. Roosevelt, to have more women in his White House office, which made Frances Perkins to be the first woman to ever hold a cabinet position. Her position was the secretary of the driving force behind the Social Security Act. The women tried their hardest to protest against the Social Security Act and change it so the women can have the same rights as the men, but they didn't get far.
The stock market crash during the Great Depression caused many people to lose jobs because people from all different financial backgrounds put their savings into the stock market. Soon, many people throughout the country couldn't spend any money, which led to a fall in production of goods. After the stock market grew at an alarming rate, it bursted because supply overweight demand. As a result, the United States experienced many factory layoffs. In October 1929, the stock market had a crash, which was one of the largest crashes. After the crash, many different banks crashed, which made the country reach its lowest point, where over 15 million Americans were unemployed in American history. Women were struggling trying to take care of their kids. Life was hard.
For those women who managed to stay employed, Over 25% of the National Recovery Administration's codes set lower wages for women. Also, jobs were created under the Work Progress Administration to keep women in fields like sewing and nursing that paid less than roles for men. Now, in the 2000s, both women and men work outside the house in all different work fields. McDonald, and we're here with 6th grade social studies teacher, Mr. Kohlerberg.
Yeah!
We're going to be asking him 2 questions, and the first one is, how did women get affected during the Great Depression?
Well, the Great Depression was hard for everybody, especially for women. A lot of women had to leave home and become full-time and part-time workers, and even a lot of things in physical labor. There's a thing you see, the Great Depression, there's a political thing called Rosie the Riveter, and it's an ad to kind of encourage women to go into the workplace. So it affected women a lot. Not only did women always have to be, especially in these days, they had to be the childbearer and, traditional stay-at-home women. But when this happened, women were forced to go into the workplace and step up and take some roles that were usually occupied by men. So without women's contributions during that time period, who knows how the country would have been affected.
I agree. The next question is, what do you think were the primary causes of the Great Depression?
Great Depression, Great Depression, it usually starts with a financial situation. So there were, just at that time, a lot of growth in the U.S. economy, as well as World War I beginning. One of the things that we're actually studying now in 6th grade, we're studying World War I and the Treaty of Versailles, and kind of how the Great Depression affected globally is that when our economy went down, it affected the world. So when American economies crashed, it just doesn't affect us Americans, it affects globally, especially in the early 1900s around World War I, it affected Germany. So our economy is such a big thing, it affected other countries. We got in trouble by loaning money to other countries that couldn't repay us back. So a lot of thing about America always being the big brother of the world of democracy. Part of the Great Depression was us helping out other countries, giving them loans, and those countries not being to pay those loans back. So the Great Depression it started here, but America is such a central force when it comes to economic and democracy. It affected the whole world. But it was pretty much America helping a lot of countries out, giving loans, and those countries couldn't kind of repay those loans.
We're here with 6th grade social studies teacher, Ms. Heffler.
Woo!
How did women get affected during the Great Depression?
So women were greatly affected, one, because the men were traditionally the breadwinners. And so when jobs were cut in half, men were no longer able to work or bring home the same amount of money. And if you're not bringing home that money, you can't run a household. And so a lot of women were affected by poverty. Also at the time, there was not any form of contraceptives, so women were still having children, even though they couldn't afford it. So there was a lot of nervousness and uncertainty during that time, because if you had a kid, what were you supposed to do if you can barely feed the 4 other kids that you have already?
Okay. So, and then your second question is, how is women's rights different from now to then?
So now, going first off of what I just talked about with contraceptives and the access to having all of that, women are able to have more control over their bodies and more control over when they have children. And that's really going to affect poverty and being able to afford children. You can have more control over that. And on top of that, women are in the workforce. So if you are with someone, you're married, you have a partner, like if my husband lost his job, we would be not in the best situation, but I still have a job because I'm able to work now. I'm able to have my own bank account, and I'm able to be my own person, and also have a 6th grade class that won't be quiet. And that really has allowed women to have that autonomy over themselves that they did not get in the 1930s. And on top of that, there's access to things like food stamps, Social Security. There's a lot more government systems in place to help people who are struggling with poverty. They might not be ideal, they might not be the best, and they might be hard to qualify for, but they are there, and as long as women and everyone keeps fighting for them, we're going to still have those in place to keep those women's rights.
I'm Luca McDonald, and that was women's rights during the Great Depression.